The dashboard clock read 9:47 p.m. when I turned onto Maple Ridge Drive, every muscle in my body screaming from my bed after a 16-hour shift coordinating supply chains on base. My headlights swept across my modest ranch house, and that's when I saw her. Sandra Martinez, arms crossed, designer sunglasses perched on her head despite the darkness, standing directly in front of my garage door like a human barricade. "You need to move that truck immediately," she announced, before I'd even killed the engine. Her Mercedes SUV sat at an angle across my driveway entrance, effectively trapping me on the street. I climbed out slowly, steel-toed boots hitting pavement with the kind of exhaustion that makes simple movements feel monumental. "Sandra, this is my property. I just need to park and get inside." "I don't think so." She pulled out her phone with manicured nails that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "Your contractor vehicles are ruining this neighborhood's character. Someone needs to take a stand." "Ma'am, I live here. This is literally my house." "Save it." She was already dialing, her voice shifting into that particular tone of manufactured distress. "Yes, hello. I need base security at 4892 Maple Ridge immediately. There's a contractor harassing residents and refusing to vacate private property. He's becoming aggressive." 2 MPs arrived within 7 minutes, their patrol vehicles' lights painting the quiet street in alternating blue and red. I recognized Corporal Jensen immediately. We'd worked together on logistics for his unit's deployment last spring. Sandra launched into her performance before either MP could speak. "Officers, thank God you're here. This man has been parking his commercial vehicles on our street for weeks, lowering everyone's property values. Tonight, he's actually blocking access and making threats." "Ma'am," Jensen interrupted, his flashlight briefly illuminating my face before recognition flickered across his expression. "Mr. Hayes, is that you?" "Evening, Corporal." I managed a tired smile despite wanting to collapse right there on my own driveway. Sandra's confidence wavered for exactly 3 seconds before doubling down. "You know this person? Well, that explains everything. Obviously, there's some kind of buddy system protecting contractors who—" "Ma'am," Jensen's voice carried that particular military firmness that cuts through civilian dramatics like a hot knife. "This is Mr. James Hayes. He's a civilian logistics contractor on base. More importantly, he owns this property, and you're currently blocking his legal access to his own driveway." The color drained from Sandra's face in stages, like watching time-lapse footage of a sunset. "This is his house?" "Yes, ma'am, and unless you'd like us to document this as harassment of base personnel, I'd suggest moving your vehicle and allowing Mr. Hayes to access his property." I'd lived on Maple Ridge for exactly 3 months. 3 months of trying to keep my head down, rebuild my life after a divorce that took everything except my sanity in this house. 3 months of early mornings and late nights, pouring my energy into work because idle time meant thinking about the family photos that used to hang on different walls in a different life. James Hayes, age 42, 23 years managing military supply chains when my marriage fell apart, and staying active duty meant choosing career and custody battles. I lost both anyway, but at least the contractor salary helped me scrape together the down payment on this place. Weekends, I restore vintage motorcycles in my garage, a 1972 Honda CB750 currently in pieces across my workbench. The smell of penetrating oil and the sound of classic rock keep the silence from getting too loud. Remind me that broken things can be fixed with enough patience and the right tools. Sandra Martinez, meanwhile, had made it her personal mission to remind me I didn't belong here from day one. She ran the neighborhood watch program with the authority of someone confusing a volunteer position with actual law enforcement. Her husband, Captain Robert Martinez, deployed 6 months ago, leaving her to police this street like it was her private fiefdom. That first week, she'd shown up with store-bought cookies and a smile that didn't reach her eyes.
Welcome to Military Housing Adjacent. We maintain certain standards here. The emphasis on adjacent made it clear that contractor status ranked somewhere below actual military families in her personal hierarchy.
The morning after the driveway incident, I found a laminated notice zip-tied to my mailbox. The hot pink paper stood out like a beacon against the standard black metal. Attention! Commercial vehicle parking violates community aesthetic standards. Continued violations will result in formal complaints to Base Housing Authority and potential HOA action. Signed, Neighborhood Standards Committee. There was no HOA. I'd checked extensively before buying, specifically to avoid that particular bureaucratic nightmare. But Sandra had created her own unofficial governing body, basically her book club with pretensions of authority. I crumpled the notice and tossed it in my recycling bin, figuring that was the end of it. I was wrong. Day 3 brought a photograph shoved under my door, my work truck parked on the street, taken from multiple angles, with handwritten measurements claiming it exceeded commercial vehicle length restrictions. The citation code she'd referenced didn't actually exist in city ordinance, but they looked official enough to make me spend my lunch break at City Hall confirming my truck was completely legal. "Listen," said Maria Gonzalez, the city clerk who'd helped me with my property title. "We get calls about that neighborhood constantly. Same woman, different complaints. She cited commercial vehicle codes that haven't existed since 1987, referenced parking restrictions for streets that don't have them, and once tried to invoke maritime law for a property dispute 3 miles from the nearest body of water." "So I can just ignore her?" "Legally, yes. Practically?" Maria lowered her voice, glancing around the empty office. "People like that don't stop until they get what they want, or until someone stops them. Document everything." The special meeting happened week 2. Every resident on Maple Ridge received a formal invitation printed on cream cardstock with embossed lettering. Sandra had clearly spent money on this production. Community Standards Discussion, Preserving Our Neighborhood Character. The meeting location was the Community Rec Center, typically reserved for actual official gatherings, giving the whole thing an air of legitimacy it didn't deserve. I walked into that room and immediately understood this was an ambush. 30 folding chairs arranged in neat rows, all facing a presentation screen where Sandra stood with a laser pointer and the confidence of someone who'd rehearsed this performance extensively. "Thank you all for coming," she began, clicking to her first slide. "Tonight, we'll discuss maintaining the military community standards that make our neighborhoods special." The presentation was a masterclass in passive-aggressive warfare disguised as civic concern. Slide 1 showed my truck parked legally on the street. Slide 2 featured my house, photographed from her bedroom window at an angle that made my modest ranch look somehow suspicious. Slide 3 was a property value graph, claiming homes near commercial activity depreciated faster than others. No citation for the study, naturally. "Certain residents," Sandra continued, never saying my name but staring directly at me, "don't understand that military communities require a specific level of presentation and pride. We can't allow outside elements to compromise what we've built here." The questions started immediately, each one rehearsed. Can we petition to ban contractor parking? Should Base Housing Authority be notified about unprofessional appearances? What's the process for removing residents who don't fit our community culture? 30 people discussed my existence like I was a zoning violation instead of a human being trying to live quietly next door. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead while coffee grew cold in styrofoam cups, and I sat there feeling like a defendant in a trial where the verdict had been decided before I arrived. When Sandra finally asked if I wanted to respond, I stood on legs that felt unsteady. "I follow every local regulation. I work on the same base most of you are connected to. I want to be a good neighbor." My voice sounded defensive even to my own ears, and I hated that she'd put me in a position where I was justifying my right to exist in my own home.
The applause was scattered and uncomfortable, the kind people offer when they know something's wrong but don't want to be the one to say it out loud. Walking back to my truck, gravel crunched behind me. Tom Wilson, a retired Army sergeant from 2 houses down, caught up and grabbed my shoulder. "That was complete bullshit," he whispered, checking to make sure Sandra wasn't within earshot. "Some of us remember what service actually means, but—" He trailed off, the unspoken reality hanging between us. Standing up to Sandra meant becoming her next target, and most people weren't willing to risk it.
That Saturday, I was elbow-deep in carburetor parts when voices in my driveway made me look up from the Honda's disassembled engine. A landscaping crew stood around the 3 oak trees that marked my property line, massive trees that had been here longer than the house itself. The crew foreman looked distinctly uncomfortable, holding official-looking paperwork. "Sir, we've got a work order for tree removal. Says these oaks are encroaching on Mrs. Martinez's property and need immediate removal per city ordinance." I wiped grease off my hands, my stomach already sinking. Those trees are at least 10 feet inside my property line. Ma'am's got documentation saying otherwise. He showed me papers with county seals, surveyor's stamps, and enough official letterhead to look legitimate. According to this survey, my tree sat 2 feet over the property line, requiring immediate removal at my expense. Where is this documentation from? Mrs. Martinez filed it last week, got approved through expedited city processing. Right on cue, Sandra appeared from her perfectly maintained hedge line like she'd been waiting for this exact moment. She dressed for the occasion, pressed khakis, button-down blouse, hair in a tight bun that screamed, "I mean business." The manila folder in her hands looked thick enough to contain my death warrant. "James," she smiled, with the warmth of a shark circling wounded prey. "I tried to handle this neighborly, but you've been uncooperative about property encroachment. The city requires removal of any vegetation crossing boundary lines." I examined her official survey, my hands trembling slightly. It looked perfect. Professional graphics, legitimate seals, notarized signatures. Either my original property deed was fraudulent, or someone had spent serious money fabricating this. "I'll need to verify this with the county before allowing any work." "The work order is effective immediately," Sandra countered, her smile never wavering. "Removal begins Monday at 8 a.m. You're welcome to file appeals after the fact, but I wouldn't recommend it. Legal challenges are expensive, and the city sides with documented surveys." She'd trapped me beautifully. Fighting would cost thousands in legal fees, surveys, and lost work time. Those trees represented at least $6,000 in property value, but proving her documents were fake might cost twice that. And she knew it. You'd think public exposure would make Sandra back down. You'd be wrong. The following Tuesday, exactly when I get home from night shifts, I turned onto Maple Ridge to find 4 cars positioned like a military blockade, perfectly arranged to block my driveway without technically violating any parking laws. All 4 vehicles belonged to Sandra's book club friends. I knocked on doors for 20 minutes, exhaustion making each step feel like wading through concrete. Same scripted response from each woman. "We're legally parked on a public street. First come, first served." Sandra watched from her porch, coffee mug raised in a mock toast. "Having trouble accessing your property, James? Perhaps you should have been more cooperative about community standards." I parked 6 blocks away that morning, hauling my work gear through autumn streets while leaves crunched under my boots and rage simmered in my chest. The walk gave me time to think, and thinking led me to remember something from my property deed, a clause about residential parking permits. Wednesday lunch break, I was at City Hall, armed with a mission. The same clerk who'd helped me before pulled up street regulations with practiced efficiency. "Your street qualifies for residential permit parking if any property owner requests it," he explained. $30 annually, restricts street parking to permit holders only between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. You'll need signatures from affected properties and valid justification. I had both. Tom Wilson signed immediately, practically celebrating the chance to legally fight back against Sandra's tactics. "It's about damn time someone used her own playbook against her," he grinned. The city council approved my permit application within 48 hours. By Monday, official permit parking only signs decorated the street directly in front of my driveway, and I had legal documentation allowing me to park while everyone else needed permits they didn't have. Tuesday evening, I positioned myself at my kitchen window with coffee in anticipation. Sandra's book club arrived right on schedule, parking in their usual formation without noticing the new signage. 7 cars sitting illegally in a freshly designated permit zone. I didn't even need to call it in. Parking enforcement runs regular sweeps of permit zones, and clustered violations basically guarantee tickets. The symphony started around 9 p.m., car doors slamming, voices rising in disbelief, heels clicking frantically on asphalt, as 7 women discovered bright orange citations decorating their windshields. Total damage? $1,400 in parking fines for what Sandra had smugly called perfectly legal public street parking. My doorbell rang 30 minutes later. Sandra stood there clutching her citation, mascara slightly smudged like she'd been crying or screaming or both. "You need to fix this immediately. These are public streets. You can't just create private parking zones." Actually, the city creates parking zones. I simply filed the proper paperwork using existing municipal regulations. I held up my permit approval documents. Same process you used with your creative property surveys. Her face went through several shades of red before settling on a color that matched the pink accessories she loved so much. "This isn't over," she hissed. But her threat carried less conviction now that her friends were out $1,400. You'd think public exposure would make Sandra back down. You'd be wrong. The following Tuesday, exactly when I get home from night shifts, I turned onto Maple Ridge to find 4 cars positioned like a military blockade, perfectly arranged to block my driveway without technically violating any parking laws. All 4 vehicles belonged to Sandra's book club friends. I knocked on doors for 20 minutes, exhaustion making each step feel like wading through concrete. Same scripted response from each woman. "We're legally parked on a public street. First come, first served." Sandra watched from her porch, coffee mug raised in a mock toast. "Having trouble accessing your property, James? Perhaps you should have been more cooperative about community standards." I parked 6 blocks away that morning, hauling my work gear through autumn streets while leaves crunched under my boots and rage simmered in my chest. The walk gave me time to think, and thinking led me to remember something from my property deed, a clause about residential parking permits. Wednesday lunch break, I was at City Hall, armed with a mission. The same clerk who'd helped me before pulled up street regulations with practiced efficiency. "Your street qualifies for residential permit parking if any property owner requests it," he explained. $30 annually, restricts street parking to permit holders only between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. You'll need signatures from affected properties and valid justification. I had both. Tom Wilson signed immediately, practically celebrating the chance to legally fight back against Sandra's tactics. "It's about damn time someone used her own playbook against her," he grinned. The city council approved my permit application within 48 hours. By Monday, official permit parking only signs decorated the street directly in front of my driveway, and I had legal documentation allowing me to park while everyone else needed permits they didn't have. Tuesday evening, I positioned myself at my kitchen window with coffee in anticipation. Sandra's book club arrived right on schedule, parking in their usual formation without noticing the new signage. 7 cars sitting illegally in a freshly designated permit zone. I didn't even need to call it in. Parking enforcement runs regular sweeps of permit zones, and clustered violations basically guarantee tickets. The symphony started around 9 p.m., car doors slamming, voices rising in disbelief, heels clicking frantically on asphalt, as 7 women discovered bright orange citations decorating their windshields. Total damage? $1,400 in parking fines for what Sandra had smugly called perfectly legal public street parking.
My doorbell rang 30 minutes later. Sandra stood there, clutching her citation, mascara slightly smudged like she'd been crying or screaming or both. "You need to fix this immediately. These are public streets. You can't just create private parking zones." "Actually, the city creates parking zones. I simply filed the proper paperwork using existing municipal regulations." I held up my permit approval documents. "Same process you used with your creative property surveys." Her face went through several shades of red before settling on a color that matched the pink accessories she loved so much. "This isn't over," she hissed, but her threat carried less conviction now that her friends were out $1,400.
Most people would recognize defeat after $1,400 in parking tickets exposed their entire friend group to financial consequences. Sandra Martinez wasn't most people. She escalated to nuclear warfare. Thursday morning, my supervisor's voice cracked over the phone with an edge I'd never heard before. "Hayes, get to my office immediately. We have a serious security situation that requires your immediate attention." Lieutenant Commander Patricia Brooks sat behind her desk with the expression of someone forced to handle something distasteful. The manila folder she slid across the desk bulged with documents, each bearing Sandra's distinctive signature in royal blue ink. "We've received multiple security reports concerning your off-base behavior," Brooks said, her voice carefully neutral. "These complaints suggest potential security risks that require immediate investigation and possible clearance review." My hands actually shook as I opened the folder. Report after report, each more creative and vicious than the last. Subject maintains irregular schedules consistent with unauthorized activities. Unidentified individuals accessing property at unusual hours for unknown purposes. Loud mechanical noises during evening hours, potentially masking illicit operations. Strong chemical odors from residential garage consistent with explosive or drug manufacturing. That last one hit like a physical blow to the chest. 23 years of honorable work, and this woman was painting me as a potential terrorist because I restored motorcycles on weekends. "Ma'am, these reports are about my work shifts and my hobby restoration projects," I managed, fighting to keep my voice professional while my career hung by a thread. "The unidentified individuals are Amazon delivery drivers. The mechanical noises are motorcycle repair. The chemical odors are WD-40 and paint thinner." Brooks nodded, but her expression remained troubled. "I believe you, James, but formal complaints require formal investigation, especially with your security clearance renewal coming up in 6 weeks. These allegations complicate everything." Walking back to my desk felt like a death march. Coworkers who'd been friendly yesterday suddenly found their computer screens fascinating. The break room emptied when I entered. In the contractor world, security investigations spread like plague, and association with someone under review can contaminate your own status. That evening, I stood in my garage, surrounded by the Honda's disassembled parts, breathing in motor oil and metal polish that used to represent peace, but now felt like evidence in Sandra's manufactured case. Every tool, every chemical, every restoration manual could be twisted into something sinister by someone determined enough to destroy what little stability I'd rebuilt. But 2 decades of military logistics taught me something crucial. Investigations are only as valid as their supporting evidence. If Sandra wanted to weaponize documentation, I'd show her how professionals collect legitimate proof. I filed a Freedom of Information Act request for all contractor-related security complaints submitted to base operations in the past 3 years. The FOIA process typically takes weeks, but I marked it urgent and provided my security clearance number to expedite review. The results arrived via encrypted email 4 days later, and what I discovered made my stomach clench with equal parts rage and vindication. Sandra hadn't just targeted me. 5 other civilian contractors had been subjected to her systematic character assassination over the past 2 years. Each followed the same methodology: initial harassment about minor violations, escalating to property disputes,
culminating in security reports designed to destroy their clearances and careers. One contractor, David Chen, had actually lost everything after Sandra's campaign. His security clearance was suspended during investigation, his base access revoked, his contract terminated. By the time the investigation cleared him 9 months later, he'd lost his house to foreclosure and his marriage to the stress. He'd moved to Oregon to rebuild his life from scratch. The documentation showed chilling coordination. Sandra would begin with neighborhood complaints, establishing a pattern of problematic behavior. Then she'd escalate to property violations requiring legal defense. Finally, she'd file security concerns that triggered investigations contractors couldn't afford to fight. She was systematically purging civilian contractors from the neighborhood, using her administrative position as a weapon, targeting anyone who didn't fit her vision of proper military community demographics. I reached out to Sandra's other victims during lunch breaks that week, building a network of survivors who'd been too isolated to resist before. David Chen agreed to provide testimony via video conference, his voice carrying the weight of someone still recovering from institutional betrayal. "Her lies cost my family everything," he said during our call. 8 months of unemployment, foreclosure, divorce. If my testimony prevents her from destroying other families, I'll gladly participate in any investigation. I contacted Captain Lisa Rodriguez from Base Legal Assistance over coffee that tasted like government-issued determination. She reviewed my growing harassment file with the careful attention of someone who'd seen this pattern before. "What you've documented demonstrates systematic discrimination and abuse of official authority," she explained, flipping through evidence that painted an increasingly damning picture. "Base housing coordinators operate under strict federal guidelines. These complaints violate multiple regulations about fair treatment in military communities." Then she dropped the bombshell that changed everything. "By the way, we're looking for a new housing coordinator. The current coordinator is facing significant performance issues. Given your logistics background and security clearance and proven people management," I nearly dropped my coffee cup. "The current coordinator? You mean Sandra's position?" "Her position is under formal review by the Inspector General," Rodriguez confirmed. "Between us, it's not a question of if she'll be terminated, just when. The job requires exactly your skill set: logistics experience, security clearance, and proven people management." I sat in my truck in the parking lot after that meeting, autumn wind carrying the scent of diesel exhaust and new possibilities. Sandra had spent months trying to destroy my career, filing false reports, manufacturing security concerns, attempting to paint me as unsuitable for base work. She had no idea she was harassing her future replacement. Every false report she'd filed had actually highlighted my professionalism by contrast. While she abused complaint systems, I'd maintained spotless work records and clearance status. While she violated fair treatment protocols, I'd built genuine community relationships with families she'd terrorized. Her personnel file read like a masterclass in career self-destruction. 49 formal complaints in 30 months, 3 official reprimands for exceeding authority, active IG investigation into housing discrimination, documented pattern of retaliation against residents who challenged her authority. The woman who thought she was strategically eliminating threats had been systematically documenting her own misconduct. I spent that evening in my garage, but instead of working on the motorcycle, I built a comprehensive file of Sandra's harassment. Every incident, every witness, every piece of evidence organized with the precision that had made me successful in logistics operations. Tom Wilson brought over 2 beers and helped me position additional security cameras within legal boundaries. "She's going to implode when she realizes what's happening," he predicted. "Your job is staying calm and letting her destroy herself." Base legal assistants became crucial allies. Captain Rodriguez reviewed my evidence file and connected me with other victims willing to testify. David Chen's video testimony about losing his career to Sandra's false reports was devastating, the kind of thing that makes Inspector General investigators very interested in patterns of abuse.
Sandra discovered I had applied for her position 3 days before the review board hearing. The base receptionist called my extension with barely concealed amusement. "Mr. Hayes, you have a visitor in the lobby making some very serious allegations about national security." I found her pacing the marble floors like a caged animal, her usual composed mask cracked and slipping. She dressed for battle. Power suit, fresh manicure, hair in that severe bun she wore for official business. But something was different. Her movements were frantic, her voice pitched higher than normal, her eyes carrying the desperate gleam of someone watching their kingdom crumble. "There he is," she announced loudly enough to stop conversations across the entire lobby. "The man who's been stalking my family and threatening military housing security." Base personnel and contractors turned to stare. Sandra didn't care. She pulled out printed photographs of my security cameras, property, and even screenshots from the neighborhood Facebook group where I'd posted the survey results. "This man has been conducting systematic surveillance on military families," she declared, holding up evidence of her own obsessive documentation of my property. "He's documenting our children's schedules, planning God knows what kind of attack, and now he's trying to infiltrate base housing operations." Lieutenant Commander Brooks appeared within minutes, drawn by reports of a security disturbance. Her expression shifted from professional concern to barely disguised frustration as Sandra launched into a prepared speech about my obvious dangerousness and unsuitability for any position involving military families. "Mrs. Martinez, we should discuss this privately." "Privately?" Sandra's voice cracked. "So you can cover up for him? Everyone knows contractors get special treatment while military families suffer. This man doesn't belong anywhere near our community, and you're all complicit in—" "Ma'am," Brooks's voice carried command authority that cut through Sandra's hysteria. "You're making unsubstantiated allegations in a public space. If you don't lower your voice and move this to an appropriate venue, security will escort you from the premises." Sandra's response was to escalate further, her voice rising to near screaming levels about conspiracies, contractor preferential treatment, and obvious security threats that everyone was too blind to recognize. 2 security officers appeared and quietly began guiding her toward the exit, while she continued shouting about my obvious guilt and government corruption protecting dangerous civilians. The lobby remained silent after she left, everyone processing what they'd just witnessed. Then Tom Wilson, who'd been picking up access badges, started a slow clap that spread across the waiting area. "That," he announced to the room, "is what happens when bullies realize they're losing." Sandra's workplace implosion apparently wasn't enough catharsis for her deteriorating mental state. That evening, she launched a social media campaign that made her previous Facebook complaints look restrained. Posts appeared on every platform she could access: neighborhood groups, base spouse forums, local community pages, each one painting me as an escalating threat to public safety. Alert: contractor conducting surveillance on military families in Maple Ridge. Danger: unidentified individual infiltrating base security systems. Warning: dangerous man targeting children and housing security. The posts grew increasingly unhinged as hours passed, each including carefully cropped photos of my house, truck, and security cameras presented as evidence of malicious intent rather than defensive measures against her harassment. But the campaign backfired spectacularly. Instead of rallying support, her posts triggered an avalanche of responses from people who'd either witnessed her workplace meltdown or experienced her harassment firsthand. The comment threads became testimonials about Sandra's own problematic behavior. I watched her get escorted out of base administration today, screaming about conspiracies. She filed false animal control reports to force us to get rid of our service dog. She's been harassing our family for 18 months because she doesn't approve of mixed-race marriages. Tom posted security footage of Sandra measuring my fence line at 2 a.m. with the caption, "This is what actual surveillance looks like."
The video went viral within the military community, generating thousands of comments about her obsessive behavior and obvious instability. By midnight, Sandra had deleted most posts, but screenshots live forever in the digital memory of communities that finally see patterns of abuse exposed. Her attempt to destroy my reputation had instead revealed her own instability to everyone who mattered. The review board hearing was still 48 hours away, but the outcome felt inevitable. Sandra had just demonstrated exactly why she needed to be removed from any position involving authority over others. The morning after her social media meltdown, a process server appeared at my door with documents that reeked of desperation. James Hayes, you're being served with a temporary restraining order filed by Sandra Martinez. My hands trembled reading allegations that would have been laughable if they weren't potentially career-ending. According to Sandra's sworn statement, I had engaged in systematic stalking and surveillance, threatened her family's safety through escalating harassment, created a hostile environment designed to intimidate military families, used my position to orchestrate retaliation against her legitimate complaints. The restraining order demanded I stay 500 feet from her property, cease all surveillance, and remove security cameras that violated her privacy. The hearing was scheduled for Thursday, exactly 1 day before my housing coordinator interview. The timing wasn't coincidental. Sandra was trying to derail my candidacy by painting me as dangerous enough to require court intervention. I called Captain Rodriguez immediately, probably sounding more panicked than a 23-year veteran should. I need legal representation for a restraining order hearing that could destroy everything. Bring every piece of documentation you have, she replied with calm confidence. False restraining orders are serious business, especially when they're weaponized to interfere with employment. We spent 6 hours organizing evidence that told a completely different story than Sandra's dramatic narrative. Security footage of her surveilling my property, documented timeline of her harassment campaign, screenshots of her deleted social media posts, testimony from neighbors witnessing her obsessive behavior. This isn't just defense, Captain Rodriguez explained while reviewing Sandra's petition. This is demonstrating to the court that she's been systematically harassing you, then using legal systems to continue that harassment when other methods failed. The night before the hearing, I sat in my garage with the partially assembled Honda, breathing in motor oil that had once meant sanctuary, but now felt tainted by months of warfare. Tom appeared with beer and grim determination. Tomorrow's gonna be brutal, he warned. She'll come in with tears, victim rhetoric, probably character witnesses who don't know the full story. I know. The beer tasted like liquid courage mixed with resignation. Sometimes that's enough, Tom nodded. Sometimes judges see through the performance. Thursday morning arrived with October air, sharp enough to make everything feel consequential. The courthouse smelled like old wood, burnt coffee, and the nervous anticipation of people fighting for their futures. Sandra arrived with an entourage, her book club friends who still believed they were supporting an innocent victim against a dangerous stalker. She dressed in soft pastels, minimal makeup, and the kind of calculated vulnerability designed to trigger protective instincts. Judge Margaret Sullivan had the weathered expression of someone who'd presided over countless restraining order hearings and developed a finely tuned bullshit detector. She reviewed Sandra's petition with careful attention, occasionally glancing up to study both parties with evaluative eyes. Mrs. Martinez, present your evidence of threatening behavior. Sandra's testimony was worthy of an Oscar nomination. She painted me as an escalating threat who'd progressed from property disputes to surveillance to workplace intimidation. She presented photographs of my security cameras as stalking evidence, characterized my presence at neighborhood events as threatening, and described my job application as proof of obsession with controlling her life. Your Honor, I fear for my children's safety, she concluded with perfectly timed emotion. This man has demonstrated increasingly unstable behavior, and I need the court's protection." Then Captain Rodriguez stood and systematically dismantled every element of Sandra's narrative with documented evidence. Security footage showing Sandra measuring my property at midnight, timeline demonstrating her initial harassment, screenshots of discriminatory social media posts, testimony from David Chen about her pattern of targeting contractors, her own personnel file documenting systematic abuse of authority. The judge's expression shifted from professional skepticism to visible disgust as evidence mounted. When Captain Rodriguez presented base IG reports showing Sandra's pattern of filing false complaints, Judge Sullivan's patience snapped. "Mrs. Martinez, this court finds your petition not only without merit, but deliberately frivolous and malicious," she announced with the authority of someone who'd seen enough lies for one lifetime. "The evidence clearly demonstrates you've been the aggressor in systematic harassment of Mr. Hayes. Your restraining order is denied, and you're ordered to pay his legal fees totaling $3,200. But the judge wasn't finished. "Furthermore, I'm forwarding this case to the district attorney for review of potential criminal charges for filing false reports and abuse of legal process. Your conduct suggests a pattern of weaponizing court systems against individuals who've committed no offense beyond existing in proximity to your residence." Sandra's face went from pale to gray. Her supporters shifted uncomfortably, suddenly less certain about whose side they'd chosen. Walking out of that courtroom into autumn sunshine felt like breaking surface after drowning. Tom clapped my shoulder with the satisfaction of someone who'd witnessed complete and total justice. She just destroyed herself in front of a judge, on the record with legal consequences, he grinned. "Your job interview tomorrow is going to be a formality."
The monthly base housing town hall had never seen attendance like this. Word about the restraining order hearing had spread through military channels faster than classified intelligence, and the community center buzzed with anticipation. Base Commander Colonel Michael Stevens sat at the head table alongside the Housing Review Board and base legal assistance representatives. The local military newspaper reporter positioned herself with notebook ready to document whatever was about to unfold. I arrived early with Tom, settling into a middle row while Captain Rodriguez took a seat nearby. The room smelled like government coffee mixed with floor wax and nervous energy as families filed in, many stealing glances between me and the empty seat where Sandra usually held court. Sandra made her entrance 20 minutes late, clearly expecting dramatic impact. She dressed for vindication, power suit, fresh manicure, authoritative hairstyling. But something was wrong with her usual commanding presence. Her movements seemed frantic, her eyes carrying the desperate edge of someone fighting their last battle. "Before regular business," Colonel Stevens announced, "we have personnel changes affecting this community." Sandra straightened with the confidence of someone expecting public validation. Her remaining supporters arranged themselves nearby like a protective formation. "Effective immediately, we have a new base housing coordinator." The commander's voice carried absolute authority. "Please welcome James Hayes, who brings 23 years of military logistics experience and demonstrated commitment to fair treatment of all residents." The silence that followed felt explosive. I stood to acknowledge the appointment while scanning faces, some surprised, many supportive, a few clearly confused about how the dangerous contractor had become their housing administrator. Sandra's face cycled through emotions like a malfunctioning traffic light. "This is impossible," she declared, loud enough for the reporter's pen to start moving rapidly. "You can't promote someone under investigation for security violations." Colonel Stevens remained seated, his calm demeanor making Sandra's outburst seem even more unhinged. "Mrs. Martinez, as of this afternoon, you are no longer employed by this installation. Your termination is effective based on systematic discrimination, abuse of authority, and filing false official reports over a 28-month period." "You can't do this," Sandra's voice cracked. "This is retaliation because he filed complaints."
Actually, I said, standing with measured calm, my office will be open to address legitimate housing concerns through proper channels. This community succeeds when everyone feels welcome and fairly treated. The applause that erupted wasn't polite, it was the sound of a community relieved to finally have leadership representing their values. Families who'd been afraid to speak against Sandra's authority were suddenly free to express years of suppressed frustration. Security stepped forward as Sandra continued increasingly incoherent protests about conspiracies and persecution. Her book club supporters quietly gathered belongings and headed toward exits, realizing they'd backed the wrong horse. My first priority, as Sandra's voice faded down the hallway, will be ensuring every family in base housing feels respected, supported, and valued, regardless of background or status. Standing ovation. 200 military families on their feet applauding the idea that housing coordination could actually serve everyone fairly.
I sit in what used to be Sandra's office, completely redecorated to remove any trace of her presence, reviewing quarterly housing satisfaction reports that tell a remarkable story. The numbers speak louder than any victory speech. Discrimination complaints dropped from an average of 14 per month to 0. Housing assignment wait times decreased 47% through efficiency improvements. Anonymous satisfaction surveys, 94% positive ratings versus 31% under previous management. Sandra's consequences extended far beyond losing her job. Criminal charges for filing false official reports resulted in 8 months probation and 200 hours community service. The civil judgment for my legal fees forced her to liquidate assets, including the Mercedes SUV that started our conflict. Her husband requested transfer to a different base, citing the untenable social situation her actions created. The house went up for sale within 6 weeks, purchased by a young Navy family who actually wave when they see me working in my garage. The ripple effects reached beyond housing coordination. Colonel Stevens recommended me for regional training after our complaint rate became a model for other installations. The efficiency improvements I'd implemented, streamlined applications, transparent criteria, regular community feedback, were adopted base-wide as examples of how military services should support diverse families. My personal life found unexpected richness. The community garden project I'd proposed became reality on unused land behind the housing complex, with families from different backgrounds growing everything from tomatoes to heritage vegetables that reminded deployed service members of home. The Honda restoration finally reached completion, taking first place at the annual base car show, where military families and contractors mingled around classic engines and shared stories about rebuilding broken things. Most satisfying, I established the Base Housing Community Scholarship Fund using efficiency savings from streamlined operations. Last month, we awarded our first scholarship to David Chen's daughter for computer science studies, despite the career disruption Sandra had caused her father. The annual Unity Festival replaced the tense, exclusive gatherings that characterized neighborhood life under Sandra's reign. Families contribute dishes representing their heritage. Children play games that don't depend on housing status or parent rank. Evenings end with live music performed by service members who found creative voices in an environment celebrating diversity rather than demanding conformity. Tom Wilson summed it up best over beers in my garage last week, classic rock drifting from speakers while we worked on his vintage Harley. She spent 2 years trying to destroy you, and all she did was prepare you to be exactly the kind of leader this community needed. The lesson I share with other contractors and military families facing similar harassment always comes back to the same principles. Document everything meticulously. Build community connections. Maintain professional excellence, and never fight alone. Bullies rely on isolation and intimidation, but they crumble when confronted with organized evidence and united opposition. Looking back, Sandra's harassment campaign inadvertently prepared me for exactly the kind of leadership challenge military communities need.
Her attempts to destroy my life forced me to develop skills, relationships, and perspectives that made me genuinely excellent at the job she'd lost through her own misconduct. Last week, I received notification of another promotion opportunity: Regional Housing Coordinator, overseeing multiple installations. The recommendation letter from Colonel Stevens mentioned my exceptional ability to transform toxic environments into thriving communities and demonstrated commitment to treating all service members with dignity and respect. Sometimes the best revenge truly is massive success that makes your opponent's position irrelevant. Sometimes justice sounds like genuine applause replacing years of fearful silence. And sometimes broken things, whether motorcycles or military communities, can be fixed with patience, the right tools, and a refusal to accept that harassment is just the cost of living peacefully in your own home. If you've got your own HOA or neighborhood nightmare story, drop it in the comments below. I read every single one and learn something new about how communities can either support or destroy each other. And if this story helped you think differently about handling workplace bullies or institutional harassment, smash that subscribe button. This channel keeps growing because you all share these stories and create a community that refuses to stay silent when good people get targeted by petty tyrants. Thanks for watching, and remember, documentation defeats drama every single time.